Hi, I'm Sarah with Sew, and today I'm going to be showing you how to sew a center seam V-neck with a neckband. If you want to sew an overlap V-neck just like this one, there's a link in the description. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and check out my other how-tos. Good luck sewing your V-neck. All right, so the first thing you're going to do is get your shoulder seam sewn on your shirt and prepare your neckline. I like to clip the center back neck as well because we're going to need that really soon. I'm using the Sunday V-neck by Friday Pattern Company, so it doesn't have a shoulder seam, it just has raglan. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw the V on our neckline. So whatever your seam allowance is, I want you to draw it parallel to this raw edge and be really precise. And so one of the things I like to do is when I'm cutting out the shirt, the front, if you're cutting a piece that's on the fold, while it's folded, make sure you put a crease line right there at that center. Yeah, I know you have a V right there, but trust me, if you really want it to make sure that it's straight up and down and not like, leaning, you're gonna want to mark this center line right here. So line up all your edges as best you can and then put that little center line there. And then I'm gonna mark it a little bit in the seam allowance like that. And now I'm going to draw in my seam allowance parallel to the raw edge here, just near this V. You don't need to do the whole neckline. We're just going down here at the V. Okay, so there we have our V drawn in there, and we're just looking for that little intersection down there at the point there, and make sure it's landing at the center of your garment. Okay, now on your neckband, mark the center fold line right here. And you may even want to draw on the seam allowance. I'm going to show you that. So let's put your neckband, whatever it's cut in or whatever fabric you got going here, put this right sides together. So put this V shape right here, right sides together. And make sure you're lining up all these edges really nicely. This is so narrow that it's really easy for it to get a little bit off, and then it won't lay right or it won't look straight. All right, and so now we're going to draw in our seam allowance right here, just along this edge that we're about to sew, because this is going to form the V right here. So make sure you have your seam allowance accurately drawn on there, parallel to this edge, because we're looking for this juncture right here, and it should land on the fold line right there at your point there. All right, and so now put this right sides together, and we're going to sew the seam along this edge, the whole thing. I'm just going to use my single needle machine. It doesn't matter what you use. I find this to be really precise, so I'm doing a straight stitch. Pivot right at that fold line. And there we go. We have our seam sewn right here. You see that point is lining up with that point, and it should land on your fold line. All right, and now we're going to clip to that point. Don't go too far. All right, and now open this up. You can press the seam open if you want with your iron, or you can finger press it. Probably depends on your fabric. And now stack these two seams right on top of each other, like that, right? Just bend it right there on that fold line, okay? And so look at there, we have our V-neck, right? And so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stitch these seam allowances here, to make sure they stay stacked one on top of the other. So I'm just going to stitch it right in the seam allowance, pivot right at that seam, and go up. And we're just doing it, like an inch or so. Like that. And now I'm going to trim this and clean it all up because it's a little bit messy. And then that way also my seam allowance is going to stay nice and parallel. All right, so now our neckband is ready to sew. Okay, and so now the last step we're going to do before we attach the neckband to the whole neckline is we're going to put our seam allowance on here on the neckband. And we're going to baste it to the neckline. So let's, again, we're drawing in our seam allowance here. And these should intersect right on our seam. Right, there's our point. And now take an awl or a straight pin, and we're going to put our point right through that seam right there at the seam allowance line. And we're going to stack it right on top of the juncture of our seam allowance down here as well on the neckline. All right, and so make sure that you've got it on there, and now you can swing this around so that the raw edges line up on your neckline. We're just going to stitch it for like an inch, not much. And we're just going to sew for like an inch just to the right of the seam line, just inside of it. And we're going to go to that point. Sink your needle down right there at that juncture and the seam of your V-neck. And now rotate your work around. And then on the shirt only, you're going to lift up the neckband. And underneath, you're going to clip down, straight down that V towards your needle. You don't have to go all the way to the edge. Just clip it so that it'll relax. All right, now we're going to hold this firmly, the shirt. And we're going to pull the neckband. And when I swing it around to line up the raw edges to this side, I'm going to pull on it gently so that I don't get any tucks, right? So I'm kind of pulling like this, and I'm going to line up those seam lines just like that. Make sure there's no tucks in there, and keep sewing on that basting line that we drew, just for like an inch, just like that. So it looks like this. This is the stitch we sewed. Looks like this on this side. And see this right here, that's the slit. That's how far apart it's spread, so that it would relax and be able to bend around and sew onto the neckline. All right, now we're ready to attach it all the way around with our serger. Okay, so if you have little tails like this from that basting stitch, get rid of those, because you don't want those, especially on this side, to sneak through your seam. If they do, that's fine, we'll get rid of them later. All right, so remember I had marked the center back of my neck, and I also have that on my neckband here. And so we're going to line these 2 points up just like this. Just stack them right there. And then use a clip to secure it. All right. Okay, and so it may be tempting to sew with the neckband up, and that's completely fine if you want to do that. I do that too sometimes, but I really like sewing from the shirt up because of this juncture right here, and I want to make sure none of this shirt slips into the seam like this. So this way we can kind of pull the shirt all the way out of the way like this, and we're going to start on the V, just like this. Make sure you pull that shirt out of the way. My seam allowance is only 3/8, so I don't have to trim much. And now because of this basting stitch, all I need to do is make sure my needle lands on it and I can blend into it. And I can go past it, but not really, only a needle width. So just make sure I blend in with that seam. And now once I'm on there, now I'm going to start adjusting things. Coming around to the back. This is the shoulder area here. All right, we're halfway. So now I'm going to arrange the rest of this. I let the machine help me. I have no other pins or clips or anything, but we have our basting stitch at the center front we're relying on as well. And if you don't have clips, you can always just tack your center back neck like we did on the front, so you don't have to use pins. Oops, I wanted my seam allowance to go towards the sleeve. All right. Coming around here, just keeping all my raw edges lined up. And then now I'm getting close to the front here. I'm going to straighten all this out, make sure this fabric is flat and relaxed, and none of it is, blumping over into that seam there. And then now I'm aiming for my basting stitch, which is right here. I'm not sure if you can see it. And I'm making sure these little threads are towards the seam allowance. And I just need that left needle of my serger to line up with this stitching here. And I'm good. So same here, make sure there's no extra fabric. All right, there we go. And then I would usually take this tail, and then I like to pull it into the seam allowance and tack it down just to hide it in there. All right, so this is what it looks like on the wrong side. And this is what it looks like on the right side. There you go. You have perfect V, perfectly centered, symmetrical, a whole 9 yards, nice and flat.